I like to dive right in and get started with a platform, and it makes sense for us here with Panoply to start with loading data. That's kind of the obvious thing. And as I mentioned in the previous video, which by the way, if you haven't seen, go watch it real quick and come back, I mentioned how easy it is to get data into the platform and how many different data sources we can connect to. So we're going to start from the home page. I've got it up on my screen now, and there's a couple different ways we can navigate to the Add Data Source page. One, we can just click the button, or we can go into the Data Sources tab itself and add a new data source from the listing of all of the other data sources that I currently have. You'll notice I have icons next to my currently enabled data sources, something like a SQL Server icon, and then loading in a CSV file is one of the other options that we have. So I can quickly see where these sources are coming from, their names, are they on a schedule, when were they last run, and were those loads successful. I can also filter by the different statuses, if they're currently running or if they failed in the past. I'm going to go ahead and click the Add Data Source button, and I get the list of all the data sources I went through previously, and we're going to go to the Databases tab and choose Microsoft SQL Server. This is one of the built-in connectors, not the partner connectors. Now, at this point, we have to think, where's this data actually coming from, sort of physically in the world? For me, it's coming from an on-prem SQL Server database. So how is this web app going to connect to that on-prem SQL Server database? What we did was we went through the process of whitelisting the Panoply IP addresses, and I can click the Learn More link and then be taken to an instructions page that shows me how to whitelist the IP addresses that Panoply will use. Now, if I was on the cloud, say this was coming to a SQL Server database on Amazon Web Services or something behind another cloud instance, there's also some instructions here on to whitelist for AWS as well. I like that. It's kind of a really great guide to have when you don't necessarily know exactly how to do the whitelisting piece. Now, most of the time you'll probably be engaged with your in-house IT team or your help desk, and they should be able to whitelist those IP addresses themselves. Now, I'm going to enter the IP address. This is the publicly available IP address to access that database. This will be hidden for you on your end. Also remember that when you are given this IP address from your IT team, it will likely have a colon on the end of it and then 4 more digits indicating the port. You're not going to put that on the host line. You're going to put the port number on a separate line, and I'm going to go ahead and enter that now. Again, you're not going to see this on your side because I'm masking that from you. And then you need the username and password for a user that has access to the database and tables you are trying to load into Panoply. So again, I'm going to go and enter that now. Once I do that, the web app is going to directly hit that IP address, the publicly available one, and then give me a list of databases that I have access to for that particular user. Now, I have an Alteryx demo account and demo database that I'm going to use, so I'm going to connect to that, and then it will immediately list all of the tables and views that user has access to. For my demo, I'm going to be using the food inspections table, and we're going to load that into our Panoply instance. Now, there's a couple things I want to change immediately. One is I want to rename this data source, so it's not the generic Microsoft SQL Server name. I'm going to call this Food Inspections Load. Okay, we'll rename it. And then I can begin going down to the advanced section and talk a little bit through that. So we're going to scroll down and go to the advanced settings, expose or expand that section rather, and talk a little bit about what is in this section. Now, I'm going to talk about everything here, but I'm not necessarily going to use it in this video. We're going to go through this step by step in subsequent videos. So the schema, if you've never heard of a schema before, you can sort of think of it as a way to separate data into folders or different layouts, not necessarily a hierarchy, but groupings of data, and then apply security features and accessibility to those different schemas. That's a very rudimentary explanation of what it is, but if you think of it that way, it'll be easier to understand. Now, I have a number of different schemas in here, but one of them is called demo, and that's what I'm going to use for this example. Then I have to tell Panoply what is the table name this data is going to go to. And it's going to go to a table called food underscore inspections. This table doesn't exist right now, but it's going to be created when the data is loaded. Now, because Redshift is sitting behind this Panoply instance, everything's going to be in lowercase anyway, so I'm going to separate it by an underscore to make it easier to understand. I'm kind of a fan of camel case or the uppercase letters when you're combining all of the words into one word, but we've got to separate it by underscores here. For the primary key, this is really interesting about the primary key. If you're ever lost on what Panoply is doing, just hover over the information icon and you'll get an explanation of what it's looking for, and you can always click learn more and go to the help desk or help page and understand what it's trying to do. In this instance, for the primary key, if there is a field in your import data with lowercase I and lowercase d, so an ID field, it's going to use that field as the primary key by default. And it uses this to determine if the data has changed and make sure there's no duplicates in the data when it loads it. Now, in my case, I don't have a field with the word ID in there. Now, typically I do load data with an ID field because I know Panoply is looking for that. But here, the primary key is actually called inspection space ID, and I have to put it in curly braces. I could also create composite keys. If you're familiar with that, you can take two fields and make that one ID field. And so to do that, you'll just put a dash and then the second field in curly braces also. You can do change data capture, CDC. Again, we're not going to talk about this in this video, but we'll do it in a subsequent one, and the same with incremental loading and identifying an incremental key. We'll do that later. I can exclude columns I don't want to load, and I can parse string inside a column that I am loading. Lastly, I can truncate the table that I'm loading to, meaning every time I load this data, I want to delete all of the data that's there and reload. This is that kill and fill mentality that I was talking about before, and we're going to enable that now. All right, I'm good. Everything is set up. So I am just going to scroll up a little bit and we'll say save changes, so the data is saved, and then all we have to do is click collect data. Our screen will go back to a rotating lock icon here telling us that the data collection is proceeding right now. If I don't want to wait here, which I don't have to, I can navigate back. So we can go up to the top menu and I can go to jobs, and I can see the job running right now and just basically wait for it to finish. And then once it's finished, I can see the table in my Workbench. So we'll pause for a minute, fast forward, and then go take a look at the table once it's done loading. Okay, so the food inspections data is done loading. If I look at the line item for it, I can click on that particular item and see that it impacted one table, and there were roughly 215,000 rows added and updated. In this case, every row added was new, so they'll all be updated. The updated part will become important when we do the incremental loading and change data capture. Now, there's a couple more things I want to look at. One is we can go over to the Workbench, and there's a built-in SQL Editor here, and I can see the demo schema and the table, the food inspections tables loaded. And then I can just run a quick select statement. So we'll go ahead and select everything from demo, which is the name of the schema, .food underscore inspections. Okay, and we're also going to limit the results to the first 100 rows and hit shift and enter to run that query. And I can see the data is loaded and it looks like what I would expect it to look like. Now, there's a couple other things Panoply will add. For example, it'll tell me or include the date in which this data was loaded into Panoply. The database name it came from will be included as well, and the update time and the send time. So I have some control, or at least some way to look at when data was loaded and when it was last updated. Again, that'll be important when we do the change data capture and incremental loading piece. The last part is to go over to the Data Sources tab and then look at our food inspections load and come in and schedule the collection. So I can turn on Enable Auto Collection and then indicate which day of the week I want it to load, or if I want it to load every single day and what time I want it to load. Now just remember that this is in UTC time, so you'll have to go out and do a conversion to your local time zone if there's a specific time of day that you want it to load, or we can just set it to every hour, every 2 hours, 4, 6, and 12 is also an option. Okay, so that summarizes what I wanted to show you in this intro video to the data collection component and data sources to Panoply. We're going to look at a couple other, I won't say unique, but different data sources we can pull from. One of those really interesting ones is Google Sheets. And so we're going to go through that next. And then in subsequent videos, dive into the incremental loading and change data capture. So I'll see you on the next one.